Good morning, everyone. I hope you're well, and thank you for joining us today for our Kreston Charities Webinar, Understanding the Current Issues Facing UK Charities. My name is Niall Kingsley. I'm Head of Charities at Duncan and Topless, and we are proud to be part of the Kreston network. For those that don't know Kreston, we are a group of independent accounting firms across the UK and globally. As part of Kreston, we have our UK Charities group, which is made up of representatives of the various UK firms who get together and share their knowledge and expertise and work collaboratively together across our UK charity client base. Collectively, we represent approximately 2,000 charities across the UK. We recently published our charities survey, which sought responses from a number of these charities. And having released our report, which summarises the key findings, it's a great opportunity today to get together and delve into certain aspects of the report. To do so, I'm delighted to be joined today by speakers from across our Kreston UK charity network. And these include Chris Beaumont from Clive Owen, who is going to touch on the technology and cybersecurity aspects. Jane Marshall from BHP, who's going into diversity, recruitment and pay. And Mike Bath from James Cowper Kreston, who's looking at finance, reserves and costs. We're also extremely grateful to be joined today by Rebecca Yorke from the charity the Brontë Society to give her additions to the discussions from the perspective of a charity itself. The Brontë Society is, of course, a charity and is one of the oldest literary societies in the world. It also operates the wonderful Brontë Parsonage Museum in West Yorkshire, which I highly recommend visiting if you're in the area. Today's webinar will run for about 30 to 40 minutes and is really discussion based, and hopefully all of you attending will pick up some bits that you can relate to and perhaps some tips to take back to your board of trustees. We'll make sure we finish promptly at 11 o'clock, and there will be time for questions and answers at the end. And at the top of your screens, hopefully you will see a question and answer box where you can slot your questions in, and I will be happy to put those to our wonderful panel today. Following the webinar, you should hopefully receive a feedback form, and please do fill those in because your feedback is invaluable. We do take it on board to try and make these webinars as good as possible going forward. On that note, let's get things started, and I'm delighted to pass it over to Chris Beaumont from Clive Owen to, as I say, touch on the technology and cybersecurity aspects of the report and give his thoughts to us all today. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Niall. Right, just share my screen. So hopefully everybody can see that. Right, as Niall said, my name's Chris Beaumont and I'm one of the partners at Clive Owen Chartered Accountants. We have offices in the North East and North Yorkshire. And as Niall has said, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about technology and cybersecurity. Probably the scary bit. I'm then going to pass across to Rebecca Yorke at the Brontë Society, who's going to talk about how they've used technology as an enabler, because you'll see it in a few minutes. They have been able to sort of really use technology to their advantage over the last few years. I'm going to start though with the fact that the Charity Commission did a survey in October 22, which asked a question about how many charities experienced a cybercrime in the last 12 months. The result was sort of 1 in 8. As Niall has mentioned, as a group within sort of Duncan and Topless, BHP, James Cowper Kreston, ourselves, and others within the Kreston network, we act for about 2,000 charity clients. So on that basis, some sort of 250 of our clients have experienced a cybercrime in the last 12 months, which is really a bit of a sobering thought. And even more sobering if you then sort of look into sort of various aspects of the charity sector. And the National Cyber Security Centre undertook a survey of schools before Christmas, and the response rate there was that 78% had experienced a cyber attack, so fairly significant numbers. And you'll have seen again in the press just before Christmas about how those schools were being targeted, and literally it was the hackers were getting into the systems and then encrypting the data. So in essence, our clients could not get access to their own data. I'm not aware of anybody that actually paid any sort of ransomware during the sort of that period, but it obviously did cause, or is continuing to cause, significant disruption for those organisations. Firstly, it ruined Christmas for the IT team and the senior leadership team. Having spoken to a few sort of schools around the area, they literally had sort of their IT team in every day bar Christmas and Boxing Day. 3 months later, some of them are still not fully back online. They've had significant cost implications from the use of IT consultants and solicitors that have had to engage to see them through the process. And there's been a need to sort of watch the dark web for information being sold. Now, in reality, they're using these IT consultants to do that. But just think about what data you do hold as a charity on your systems, and actually, if somebody was to get hold of that data, how it could be used by sort of third parties. And then last but definitely not least, they've had to sort of have discussions with various sort of regulators, so the Charity Commission, the ICO, and other bodies to sort of let them know what's happened and keep them informed as things have changed, and then sort of think about how they're going to inform various people for whose data that is lost. They're going to actually get in touch with those individuals to actually sort of let them know what data has been missed so that they can take appropriate action. And it's worth saying that sort of charities like schools like to think they've got good firewalls, antivirus software in place, but obviously that's not the whole story. So it does sort of beg the question of make sure you do regular training. It doesn't always need to be expensive. I was speaking to one IT manager probably about a year or so ago, and just to get an initial impression of what the task was like within his organisation, he set up a Hotmail account. So basically a chris.bowen@hotmail account. So not using the normal email channels that one would normally expect within an organisation. And he sent an email out using that Hotmail account on the Monday morning, saying there'd been a major problem with the server and he was going to have to reset up all the users up on the system. You'd have hoped in this day and age that nobody would have replied to that, but 30% did. And given the size of the organisation, that was over 40 people. So that served as a significant warning to that organisation that they had to do a lot more training internally to make sure that people weren't sort of opening up emails that they shouldn't be opening or replying to things that they shouldn't. Also remember and change sort of passwords. Hopefully the days of a password being on a sticky note in the corner of the monitor are long gone. But do consider all devices connected to the internet. Aware of one organisation had a printer that could be accessed from the internet, and the password had not changed in over 10 years despite numerous staff changes. They were hacked by that device. It's one that nobody sort of thought was actually really a risk. And also think about insurance. I mentioned a moment ago that a school had been hacked and they'd had to use additional third-party IT support and solicitors. Thankfully, insurance picked up those costs, which were well over £100,000. 55% of those who responded to our survey said they had insurance. That leaves 45% who do not. Could you afford the costs? Lastly, ensure that IT is on the risk register and that someone is actively managing the risk, because unfortunately there is a risk. I've tried very briefly there to sort of highlight some of the risks and dangers of IT, so hopefully that's not put sort of too much of a downer on what's going to be said next. But realistically, if IT is actually used properly, I think as we all recognise, it obviously has given us all significant advantages for all the organisations that we work with. And I've worked with Rebecca at the Brontë Society for a number of years. So it's my pleasure to sort of ask Rebecca to provide her sort of insights about how the society has embraced technology and how, from their perspective, they've actually managed it and what benefits it's provided them with. So I've sort of put a few things that we may discuss on the screen there, but really, sort of, Rebecca, I think it's over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here this morning. And yes, you've certainly started us off on the scary topic, Chris. I'm not sure anybody puts the Brontes and technology in the same sentence very often, but yes, certainly over the last few years, we've really changed our approach to how we use IT. And just to talk about some of the risks that Chris has highlighted first. We have an outside provider who makes sure that our firewalls are secure and everything's in place with the server should anything happen. And that is all managed in the risk register and reviewed regularly. But I think you've just given us a really helpful reminder, Chris, about the internal training, the everyday things that can happen. Even yesterday, I got an email suggesting something was wrong with our Instagram account and to click here to verify it. And I didn't. And I hesitated and then realised and blocked that. I think those regular reminders are something that we could all do with, because we can just get very complacent and just think everyone's always aware all the time. And of course, the impact to an organisation and a charity is far greater than it is if it's your own personal account at home. So thank you for reminding us about that. But on the upside, I think the pandemic really was a catalyst for us using digital and technology more widely across the organisation. And that started immediately, as it did for, I'm sure, everybody else on this webinar, in terms of meetings and staying in touch with colleagues. I'm aware that in some sectors, meetings have happened virtually and conferences have happened virtually for many, many years, but we weren't using technology in that way. We were still booking meetings, having rooms for meetings and travelling to meetings and having face-to-face meetings. So actually using digital technologies like Teams and Zooms to meet and stay in touch became really important. And what's happened with that is that we've kept that going with our board meetings, which means that our trustees can be more diverse. They don't have to be living nearby, and we can meet quite regularly and efficiently without people having to take a lot of time out of their day to travel and spend money on travelling. So it's had that environmental impact as well, which has been really good. We've used technology as a new income stream. We've still got some way to go before it becomes a serious income stream, but holding events online, the pandemic made us realise that, well, we always knew there was a global community of Brontë fans across the world, but it enabled us to connect with them. And we were having events on a monthly basis during the lockdown and pandemic periods. And Chatbox was full of people saying hello from Arizona, hello from Mexico, hello from France, hello from Keighley. It was just absolutely wonderful to bring all those people together, and there was a real appetite for it. And going forward, we've now made a commitment that, as far as possible, all of our events will be hybrid or have an online equivalent. In some cases, that's live stream, and we're still experimenting with that, making sure that we've got the broadband width and the technology to be able to do that smoothly and efficiently, but also recording events for use online afterwards, and also in terms of the creative workshops that we do at the museum, providing resources and things online. So we're really keen to continue that. And it is about access, as Chris has put on his slide there. We have people that have been in touch saying, I've never been able to get to the museum, I can't travel, I'm housebound, and actually feeling part of the community through digital has been really positive for us. And of course, the environmental impact as well that we're talking about. So not encouraging people to travel unnecessarily has all been really good.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. I must admit, when we did the AGM, it was very, very sort of encouraging to actually sort of see everybody from sort of Canada and Finland and sort of Australia and everything else actually sort of making their comments known about how good it was that they actually to be involved in that. And you can actually sort of see the sort of the goodwill being generated on a worldwide basis by just doing that.
Yeah, that's it. And so in terms of governance as well, we did hold an AGM online last year to trial it. And this year we're going to go hybrid, because there are still people that like to be in the room and understandably, like to meet up with people. So this year we are going to do a hybrid AGM and live stream it for those that are across the world. The difficulty is finding perhaps the exact time to start it, because we've got Brontë members in Australia and Japan and America. But no, it really was great to do that. And there were people that had never been able to see the trustees before or have a chance to speak to staff before, and they could do that via the AGM being online last year. So that was really positive. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, just the last one, Rebecca. I mean, as far as sort of investment in new IT is concerned, I think you've had to invest slightly in that, but I don't think it's been a major expense as far as the organisation is concerned. It's just a question of finding the right devices, if you like, to make this happen.
Yeah, I think it's it's about getting the right advice and making sure that it's the right standard and quality for us to be able to produce events in a way that people who are paying for them expect to be able to access them smoothly, and also looking at again looking at sustainability, where it's possible to sort of hire things that aren't going to go out of date too quickly. So we can just use what we need at the time, and then it's not sitting on a shelf for 3 years getting dusty. So we're working with partners on that, and it's been a new area of expenditure. But I think like I said, it's the pandemic and the situation since the pandemic has been a real game changer for us. Thinking about how we use technology. It's always been something we thought we'd get around to, but now it's just part of what we do. It's becoming quite embedded.
Oh, that's brilliant. No, thanks very much for that, Rebecca. It's excellent insight into how technology has been used at the organisation, and I think it's been used very well over the last few years to help you sort of expand your reach, as you say. So on that note, I will stop sharing my slides and pass across to Jane Marshall.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jane Marshall. I'm a partner and head of the specialist charity team at BHP, where our charity clients are mainly spread across the north of Derbyshire and Yorkshire region. In terms of diversity, and I'm going to just talk over the next 2 or 3 minutes about diversity, recruitment, retention of staff, and then pay. Everyone's talking about diversity in terms of the board of trustees at the moment, and many boards are looking for the same person, i.e. a woman from an ethnically diverse background. But I think they miss the point. The decision about who's needed for a board of trustees is about the skill sets required for that particular charity at that particular period in the charity's strategic plan. So if the charity was in the process of buying a property, you might need someone with expertise in that particular area for the period during this project is ongoing. And I also think it's really important to look at your beneficiary group and to ensure that the trustee board has the right people to understand things from a beneficiary perspective. There's another area which I think needs consideration, and that is the age range. This is important for all sorts of reasons: succession planning, being open to new ideas, and just getting a different perspective on life. This weekend, I was staying at a hotel in Suffolk, and it was really interesting to see the diversity in the staff team in the restaurant. There was a wide spread of ages, a mixture of men and women, different cultures, and some living with a disability. And it made for a very pleasant experience because everyone was bouncing off each other with one single aim, that the clients had a great experience. And that nicely leads on to the point that charities should be looking to diversity not only in the board of trustees, but also in the senior management team to create a culture right from the top. And one final thing is on beneficiaries, and my particular experience on this is in relation to a grant-making charity. I think it's really important not to exclude beneficiary groups because they're not able to successfully complete an application form. And I think that grant-making charities in particular need to ensure that they've got alternative procedures in place to enable a range of diverse applicants to be able to apply and benefit from the grants that are available in the sector. On recruitment, and the first thing to say here is in many organisations in the charity sector, people are the biggest cost and the biggest asset to that charity. And we all know that since the pandemic, recruitment and retention of staff has been very challenging across every single sector in the UK, as employees have decided what they do and what they don't want to do. It doesn't matter whether you are in social care, the catering industry, or indeed a firm of chartered accountants, the picture is the same. So it's really important to be able to attract and retain staff based on your unique selling point. At BHP and amongst our fellow Kreston firms, we have an ethos and culture supported by a set of values in all that we do, whether that is supporting our clients or our staff team. And we recognise that our staff are our greatest asset, and therefore it is vital that we listen to them and look after them. One of the ways we do this at BHP is by getting feedback on a regular basis. So we'll do snap surveys, sending out one question every few weeks. This enables us to gauge how everyone is at a point in time, not just widely across the firm, but if there are pockets of departments in the firm where we've got a problem. And annually we do a full staff survey, but the quick questions in between keep us up to date with the mood across the different departments. And because we employ over 400 staff, we also do a firm-wide webinar once a month, so everyone is up to date with our plans and anything new. The other thing that we've heavily invested in is coaching and training, so staff feel they are learning and growing. At the end of the day, we want our staff to be the best versions of themselves, and we support them to get where they want to be. Coaching is a very effective way of doing this, and it's embedded right across the firm, from the partners down to the seniors who work with the more junior staff on a daily basis. So finally, on pay, this is a really difficult one at the moment, especially with inflation being as high as it is. And I think what I've put here at the top of this slide is it's about thinking out of the box. It's not just about what people are paid, it's about the whole package and the well-being of all the staff. There is a pressure in every organisation at the moment to pay the right rate for the job, and high inflation, as I've said, is putting a lot of pressure on charities to do this. But it's also about affordability, which is why it's really necessary to look at non-pay benefits. Ultimately, it's about being open and transparent with your workforce. At least that way, they will be able to understand why you've come up with the pay increase that you have or not at all. On non-pay benefits, employees will want to know what you are offering now in terms of flexible working, for example. Some charities I know are looking to increase annual leave entitlements. What you do in terms of providing that training and coaching, which I've just alluded to. We also provide fresh fruit for our staff in every office, and we have a voucher award system for those who go over and above. We also award one volunteering day a year so that staff can go and volunteer for their particular charity. And we have 2 firm-wide parties where we celebrate and have fun with our staff. So those are my thoughts on diversity, recruitment and pay. And I'm now going to ask Rebecca if she's got any observations on this particular bit of the survey from the Brontë Society's viewpoint.
Thank you, Jane. This is the really meaty bit of the survey, and it's the bit that sort of really speaks to me and my own interests as a leader and director of the Brontë Parsonage Museum. Diversity, I'll start first of all with the Board of Trustees, which you mentioned. Brontë Society is a membership organisation, and we have no problem attracting women to our organisation at all. But our articles actually used to say that the trustees were drawn from the membership, and more from that they were nominated by other members. So we found ourselves in a situation where trying to bring more diverse people to the board was just proving really difficult, because sort of people who knew each other, nominating each other, who'd perhaps been around for some time. And so we did quite a big piece of work in 2021 to update the articles to allow us to have a more open recruitment process and recruit to the board to fill gaps in skills, as you outlined in your talk there, but also in terms of diversity and demographic, to make sure that our board is truly representative of the society that we serve, and and society more widely as a whole. That's been really successful, but we can't be complacent. You know, it takes one or two members here to board members to move on, and we might find ourselves back in a very you know, non-representative group of trustees again. So that work and succession planning is ongoing. And I think it's also really important. I know you mentioned, you know, about having disabled people and people from different ethnic backgrounds and different age groups, but actually that lived experience is really important, you know, to have people who have got a different background and experience of life in order to bring those discussions to the board, you know, and to our vision and onto our plans is really important, I think. Otherwise you risk having people all think the same, and you know, we don't have those challenges to our way of thinking. In terms of recruitment, we haven't noticed a problem with retention the last couple of years. We did have to have a slight restructure as a result of the pandemic. But what we have noticed that when we have had posts, we've had perhaps fewer people applying. And I think that's because people, as you say, are perhaps, you know, worried about moving on and having to do a 6-month probation period and the uncertainty about that when, you know, if they've already in work. And some of the things we're doing to increase access and inclusion in our recruitment process is letting people apply in different formats. We've just recruited a trustee who is 24 and neurodivergent and who applied to be a trustee by video. She made a film, which was just absolutely brilliant. Once we could all work out how to play it. You know, and that makes a difference because the application form wasn't something that she felt would show her strengths as well as a film would. And we also share questions with candidates in advance as well, so that people who are being interviewed get the questions in advance so they can prepare. Although we are going to look at changing that to offering the questions in advance, because I think some people find it more stressful to have those questions and think of the perfect answers, and then the interview becomes a memory test as opposed to just being yourself and being your best self. But you know, we're doing these things to try and encourage people to you know, apply and put themselves forward. Technology comes in again. You know, travel and transport is really expensive at the moment, so we're holding interviews over Zoom where people have a long distance to travel. We've recently recruited somebody who was based in Dorset and who has made the move up to Haworth to have a job at the museum, but obviously that would have been a very long day, taking time off her current job to have the interview as well as the travel costs expenses. So you know, that's another way that we've been able to open up our recruitment. I really like all the things you had to say about the non-pay benefits as well, because obviously, you know, pay in the charity sector is a challenge, as you say, in keeping up with inflation. And we do try and offer lots of other things that aren't necessarily just in the pay packet. So all of our staff have a 1 hour a month wellbeing hour in which they can leave early or go for a walk or have a longer lunch break, go and do a yoga class. We offer all our staff what we call library time, which might be better defined as development time, where they can go and do some research on a personal project. But that the idea being that the research they do then feeds back into our work in some way. So, for example, one of our front of house team at the moment is wanting to look at producing an easy read guide to the parsonage. So we have different language guides, we have large print guides, but actually an easy read again for people who would find that easier than reading lots of text. We also have regular newsletters, keeping up to date with, you know, some of the more informal aspects of work. Staff can come to events free of charge as long as places aren't limited. So anything we're doing online or has got, you know, quite a large seating capacity, they can all come free and see that as CPD. We also provide fruit in the staff room, and over the last winter months, we've actually also started providing a cupboard full of soup. No questions asked. If anybody wants hot soup and for whatever reason haven't brought anything with them or don't want to be spending money in the local cafes, that's just there for people to use. And because it can be quite chilly in Haworth, and some of the work in front of the house team might involve meeting visitors outside, we've just brought in some fleeces as well. And we said absolutely optional, non-uniform. Everybody loves them, and I think they'll soon become adopted as a uniform. We also, in terms of that feedback, we have a staff forum. So every 6 weeks, a representative from each department comes with a senior management team to for a coffee, and we share ideas. And then we can also feedback on things that they've asked us in the past. And actually, the fleeces was something that came out of that. So it just shows that those forums where people can bring ideas, we can then act on those. So I think I've sort of touched on most aspects of your piece there, Jane, but is there anything else you want to ask me further, then please do.
No, Rebecca, I think that was really, really helpful. It's been really good this morning, both with Chris's session and my session, to actually have, you know, a real live viewpoint from somebody working within a charity. So that's been fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm now going to pass on to Mike for the final session.
Right, thank you, Jane. Good morning, everybody. To introduce myself, I'm Mike Bath. I'm an audit partner and head of charities at James Cowper Kreston. We're the Thames Valley and South Coast element of the firm, so Southampton, Oxford, Reading, Newbury. And I'm going to be talking this morning a little bit about what the survey said around financial position and costs and reserves. And just hopefully share that screen. In terms of the overview then, I think it's safe to say that 2022 was another tough year, and we thought getting through COVID was difficult. The conflict in Ukraine drove increased demand for an awful lot of charities and was probably the largest single factor behind cost inflation in the UK as energy prices soared. At the same time, we had turmoil in the UK political scene. We had 3 prime ministers, 4 chancellors of the Exchequer within a 4-month period. And that made it very hard for many charities, particularly the contractors and the service providers, to actually develop any kind of meaningful strategy in the absence of a stable policy platform from many areas of government. At the same time, picking up some of the things that Jane's already alluded to, very low unemployment in the UK, combined with high labour market withdrawal on the back of COVID, drove wages higher, made recruitment very difficult for a lot of charities. And finally, an equity market slump in Q4, so the last 3 months of the year, produced negative full-year returns for many foundations and grant makers. In terms of the impact of those factors on sustainability and reserves, the survey split pretty much down the middle. 56% of the survey believe that they are in a more sustainable financial position at the end of 2022 than they were sort of 3 years ago before COVID arrived. And by default, 44% of the survey think that they're less sustainable than they were 3 years ago. 73% of those surveys, so virtually 3/4, consider that they still have sufficient reserves to cover a combined fall in income and a rise in costs. But the flip side of that is that about 1/4 of our sector believes, by implication, that they don't have the reserves and the contingencies to survive another COVID level shock. And many of us will have been driving into work this morning hearing about CPI inflation being at 10-point-something% in February for the 2nd month in a row. The longer high inflation persists for both pay and non-pay costs, of course, the more that the real world value of any reserves and any liquid funds actually gets diminished in terms of its purchasing power. Looking in a bit more detail at the cost pressures revealed by the survey, probably unsurprisingly, 84% of charities said that they've seen their costs increase by over 5%. I suspect that the 16% who haven't are those very small charities, perhaps without any employees, maybe without any permanent offices of their own. I think that's the only combination that springs to mind where actually you haven't got inflation of at least 5%. 46% of the survey, virtually half, have seen their cost base increase by 10% year on year. 20%, so it's a fifth, think that they have seen costs rise by over 15%. It doesn't come easily out of the data, but I'd be interested to see the overlay between the 20% who've seen their costs go up by more than 15% and the 24% who think that they actually haven't got the reserves to cover another significant shock. The Bank of England forecasts around the February Monetary Policy Committee meeting suggests that UK inflation should drop back below 4% by final quarter of this calendar year. That fall, if it happens, cannot come soon enough for an awful lot of UK charities. In summary then, the UK cost environment has mostly been driven by global factors. UK inflation should recede in the second half of this year, but will remain high compared to where we've been for the last 10 to 15 years. About a quarter of the sector believes that they don't have sufficient balance sheet strength and liquidity to sustain another COVID level shock. So what that means in practice is that managers and trustees need to be constantly monitoring, forecasting and reforecasting, monitoring the horizon. And to paraphrase Charles Darwin, those entities that survive will be the ones who spot the issues early and respond fastest. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Rebecca, who's going to share with us some perspectives on what's the real world impact of running a charity against this combination of cost pressures.
Yeah, a really theory subject to finish on. Thank you, Mike. I think, and I appreciate that not all the charities attending this webinar will be in the same position, but Brontë Society is obviously a very public-facing charity. We have a venue, we have a visitor attraction, and obviously being closed during the pandemic was a massive impact on us, and we rely heavily on admissions to survive. We know what happened in 2020. We had the furlough scheme, there were Arts Council emergency funds, and we're still here, and we got through. But actually that did lead on into through 2021 and into early 2022, because if you've ever been to the Brontë Parsonage Museum, you'll know it's very, very small and an intimate building, and there's not a lot of ventilation. And so in order to think about the well-being of our staff and the safety of our visitors, we did restrict visitor numbers for the first half of 2022, and certainly into late spring, admitting people on a 6 people every half hour or every 15 minutes on a regular interval. And that did reduce the number of visitors through the door. So we were having to monitor our budgets and expenditure really carefully because we knew that the income would be down. We were also impacted by the fewer international visitors travelling first half of last year, and school groups who we rely on were also very slow to return. So yes, those factors of were carrying on into the first part of last year, even before what happened in the autumn, with the, as you say, the change of governments and in particular chancellors and prime ministers. So we monitoring and reforecasting is now a regular part of what we do, and we work very closely with our Finance, Risk and Audit Committee to report regularly and monitor expenditure as we go. So I think that we are certainly, I don't want to sound like we weren't on it before, but certainly we are far more aware of risk and less complacent about using reserves or having to have those reserves. And at the moment, I would say that things are looking quite positive despite everything. Our costs have gone up. We've been impacted by utility bills, but actually, unlike some museums, again, we're not a massive house. We're not a massive building. So actually, our utility costs, while they've gone up significantly, are a small proportion of our overall operational budget. And I think it's the staff costs that have been mentioned earlier, which has been the area that we've really had to be quite careful at looking at, and we are operating with fewer staff than we did pre-COVID, and that is still the case. However, this summer we'll be opening 6 days a week instead of 5, and to monitor to see whether there's appetite for more visitors or whether the same visitors will come over spread over. But we are taking on some temporary staff for the summer to get us through that period, rather than committing to permanent contracts, and then we can review at the end of the autumn, at the early autumn, end of summer, to see whether that's something that is sustainable before we consider extra expenditure. So, but the early signs for this year, we've had a good start to the year, January, February half term. I think there's always factors like the new Emily Brontë film. I think being quite close to Happy Valley has helped us. There's certainly a lot of day trippers around, and school visits are really buoyant. So the 2023 started really well, and I hope that with the careful monitoring and forecasting and some of the things that we learned during COVID and the pandemic, you know, we'll come out of this year feeling in quite a safe place.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Very interesting. I didn't for 1 minute think that I would hear the works of the Brontë sisters and Happy Valley mentioned in the same sentence. One question I'd be interested to ask, and I think you've alluded to it in when you're talking about the interaction with the Audit and Finance and Risk Committee. As an organisation, do you find yourself looking at and perhaps refreshing your risk register more frequently now than you might have done 4 years ago?
Okay, don't all take a huge shock and gasp for breath, but actually, yes, 4 years ago, our risk register was quite a dormant document, and it was there and it ticked a box, and now it's actually really live, and it's looked at regularly by SLT, and it goes to every, it's scrutinised at Finance, Risk and Audit. We've brought, we used to have a Finance and Audit Committee, it's now Finance, Risk and Audit, to make sure that it doesn't get pushed down to the bottom of the agenda. So it's scrutinised at FRA committee, and then it goes to every board meeting. And I should also add as well that we're an Arts Council national portfolio organisation, which means that we get regular funding from the Arts Council. And while that's, you know, that has that stability, it also encourages other people to invest in us, which, you know, it gives that confidence as well. It means that we've got that regular income for 3 years. But actually being an Arts Council regularly funded organisation does come with a lot of funding requirements, and obviously they as major stakeholders also want to see up-to-date reporting, up-to-date accounts, risk register being live, being looked at, being managed. So as well as our board of trustees, we have other stakeholders that are really keen to see us being on it across the board.
Thank you, very interesting. That opening comment of yours that 3 or 4 years ago, the risk register was perhaps a slightly dormant document, is by no means unusual. One of the better evolutionary themes of the pandemic that I've seen has been the way that more and more charities are now treating the risk register as a live document, something to be tabled at least at quarterly trustees meetings. And even in terms of the form and content, the best risk registers that I now see actually have a financial value in that right-hand column against each risk in terms of how much reserved or contingency do we think we need to hold in relation to each of those identified risks.
That's really interesting. We haven't gone as far as that, but it's certainly something we can take back and think about. But yeah. I look at the risk register actually as our to-do list. So, you know, there are some risks that will always be there, and all we can do is limit the likelihood. So, you know, in the unspeakable thing of the fire happening at the parsonage, the impact will always be what the impact will be. There's no way we can lessen that impact, but we can lessen the likelihood. So there are some things that are, you know, difficult to sort of change from red to green on our sort of traffic light system. But, you know, certainly things that creep into the red or amber, they're looked at as a to-do list, and so SLT and other members of the team are looking at how we, you know, what is it that we need to do to mitigate that, or to make that less of an issue, and then hopefully some lines can go off altogether.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's brilliant. And just to echo Jane's comments, it's actually great just to have somebody with insight from the charities perspective, and just to put some sort of on the ground reality to some of the points that we've been discussing today. And actually, Mike, we have had a question, which is why I jumped in, that was actually relevant to this subject. So apologies for interrupting, but I thought it was a good time to jump in and put this to you. So yeah, tied with the what you were discussing with the risk registers, Somebody's just asked, actually, are we seeing more people update their reserves policy on a more live basis to take account of the cost, climate and other factors you've been speaking about, and tied to that, are we seeing better narratives now in the annual reports surrounding reserves and those being linked to risks and future plans, rather than the familiar one we see of reserves for 3 to 6 months expenditure?
Okay, thank you, Niall. Two elements to the question there, I think. Firstly, am I seeing trustees use the risk register more proactively, and as in many cases actually ascribe a financial risk to each individual line in the register? Definitely, and I think that's a very good thing. In terms of disclosure of reserves policies and reserve strategies within the statutory accounts, I think it's getting better as a sector, but I still think there's some way to go. Even amongst those charities who have, for their own internal purposes in the risk register and board document, who have gone down that sort of financial level, there is still something of a reluctance to put that on the public record. I think to an extent there is a fear of creating hostages to fortune, and sort of have somebody come back and saying, oh, well, you know, you thought X was going to happen, actually Z happened. This is on you. And I sort of understand where that's coming from, but I don't think it's the way people should be looking at it. I'm certainly hearing that more and more funders are actually looking in great detail at reserves levels and certainly disclosure of reserves policies. You know, there's an obvious perspective where if a major grant funder is looking at an application, looking at huge reserves and saying, well, there's no clear reason why you need those reserves, what you're building them up towards. Why do you need any more of my money? Because fundamentally, reserves are money that somebody's given you to deliver charitable benefit and you haven't used yet to deliver charitable benefit. So the obvious pushback is, why do you need any more? I think there's still some way to go in terms of the articulation of what are we going to do with this money.
That's a fantastic point. That's a fantastic point. I'm conscious of time and my promise to finish by 11. Did anybody have any burning points to add to that? We have had a couple more questions, so I'm just mindful. I'd like to try and get to those if we can.
Yeah, I was just going to make one comment, and that is, I was to totally agree with what Mike said and what he's seeing. We're seeing the same, but also funders are also looking to make sure that it's not a basket case. So as well as the point about having too much in reserve, there is the flip side. And certainly when the Arts Council looked at the National Portfolio Organisation awards, that when you see some of the ones that were rejected, that was why they were rejected, because they didn't think they'd be around.
Interesting. Thank you. We have a question here, which is actually on an area we perhaps haven't covered today, so I thought it was useful to include it. Somebody said they were a little surprised that only a quarter of charities had been asked by grant funders about what they are doing to reduce their impact on the environment. I sort of to add to that, from my point of view, actually, I had that same thought, and actually, whilst the majority of charities said they were addressing environmental matters, very few are actually emphasising that and selling the charity on that basis within their annual reports and promoting those aspects to grant funders and the like. So I guess the question is, do you see this and the requirements to report on it increasing for charities as it is for businesses? Chris, do you want to have a go at that one?
Thank you for that, Niall. I think there is already sort of regulations coming in, and basically the larger sort of charities already see the fact that they've got to do carbon reporting and things like that, actually include that within the accounts. I think this is probably part of an evolution at the moment, and actually what you've got is sort of charities are thinking about it and doing more about it, but I don't think they've got so far as actually writing it in their reports as yet. And I think this is just something that's going to happen over the next few years. It is definitely very much a hot topic. So I must admit, like I think everybody else, I was surprised at the level it is at the moment. But I see this sort of increasing over the next few years as actually the charities want to sort of get the message out about what they are doing around the environmental concerns, and grant funders actually do sort of ask more questions around it, as I think they will do in due course. I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to sort of have any sort of thoughts on that at all?
Yes, so again, as an Arts Council organisation, we do have to report annually on environmental sustainability, and in order to get the last round of funding, we had to give 3-year targets for becoming a more environmentally responsible organisation, including we have a sort of, it's not quite an advisory group, it's a sort of an informal group we call our green group, which is made up of people from our gardening volunteers right up to members of the board, staff from different departments in between, and we meet about quarterly and come up with ideas of things we can do, compost bin in the kitchen, having a green ambassador for each office to make sure lights are turned off, all of those type things. But we do have to report on actual on carbon emissions and our utility use, and staff travel, the impact of that. And we use a company called Julie's Bicycle, which I think looks after charities. It might just be the art sector, but it might just be useful if people are looking for toolkits of how to measure. Charities want to start recording that. They do have toolkits to help you measure your carbon footprint and see the impact. And also we come under Bradford Council, and certainly any grants that they give do ask about how your project or or what you're going to be doing and how is that environmentally sustainable. And there's certain things that we've brought in. I also noticed that quite rightly, it's something that our staff are very passionate about. We have a lot of young staff. Initiatives we brought in is that we only provide plant-based refreshments at events, so oat milk and vegan cakes and biscuits. We've got a separate fridge for those in the kitchen at work. I'm trying to think what else we've done as a result of that, but certainly our staff are looking to us to help make the change and actually advocate for it as well. We're encouraged to tell people what we're doing and the changes that we're making so that we can influence. And just finish on a pitch for the museum, our theme at the museum this year is the Brontes and the Wild. We've got a brilliant exhibition talk about the Brontes and the weather and the landscape, and obviously that feeds into environment, and we've got an events program underpinning that, which is looking at ways to be more sustainable or enjoy nature and help make sure nature is here forever.
Great plug, Rebecca, and I'll add to that. I presume people can go to your website to see upcoming events, can they, for the Brontë Society, such as you've just mentioned?
Absolutely, it's bronte.org.uk/what's on. That's
great. Okay, we have one final question in the Q&A, and somebody has asked, if you're a charity looking at developing an EDI policy, where might you start? This is the, I guess, your diversity and equality policies, isn't it?
You want me to?
Rebecca.
Do you want to start? Shall I start with that?
Please do. Yes.
Again, this might be. Again, it might be something that's particular to the arts sector, but I'm sure there'll be equivalents for other charities. Our SLT team last year undertook a training programme delivered by the Arts Marketing Association, and they had a programme called Breakthrough, and it was a 12-month programme, meeting monthly with other organisations, often quite small arts charities, taking us right through to benchmarking every area of the organisation. So there's our website, Speak Inclusion. Our photographs representative of society is the text in a typeface that is accessible to everybody, right through to recruitment, right through to looking at our own privilege. Quite uncomfortable in some really honest conversations and things that topics that sometimes people find difficult to talk about. But it was a really good starting point. And like I said, it might not be applicable to everybody watching this webinar, but it will be similar. courses that you can do that then provide you with the toolkits and the templates to start developing those policies. But we also have an EDIB group. We have the B on the end for belonging, and in our case the E is for equity, not equality, because they are slightly different. And again, that is a group like our green group that goes from volunteers right up to board level, looking at aspects of our operations, of our marketing, of our recruitment, and how we can make sure that everyone's voice is heard and that we are becoming more representative of the communities we serve.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. Did anybody have anything else to add to that point? No, I think you covered it fantastically, Rebecca. Thank you. Okay, so we're drawing towards 11 o'clock. So a big thank you to Chris, Mike, Jane and Rebecca for speaking today. I think there's been some great points covered. I hope a lot of the charities out there can relate to those, and if nothing else, the challenges that I'm sure you're all facing, today's webinar has made you feel that you're not alone, and there's some comfort to be had in that. So thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for those who submitted some questions. And again, if you could take the time just to fill out our feedback form, then that would be very much appreciated. With that being said, I'd like to wish everybody a fantastic rest of the day. Hopefully it's not too windy where you are, but at least it's starting to look a bit brighter and we can all start to look forward to the spring and summer. On that note, we hope to see you again on a future webinar, and thank you and goodbye.